Hello and welcome back to part 2 in this series, looking at painting a resin bust. In this case it's Young Miniatures World War I Lewis gunner, and last time we looked at painting the eyes. If you haven't seen that episode, please check it out on the channel. In this video I'm going to be turning my attention to painting the face. I'm going to be showing this in extreme detail and exploring every step in the process. Right, time now for the flesh parts of the face, all the skin and everything, and for that I used Lifecolor's Flesh set. It's one of my favourite references. It is of course designed for that. Lifecolor has brought out another flesh set, and they've also changed the packaging since I used these for this flesh paint set, but the reference number's still the same. Here you can see I'm mixing two references which I'll put on screen and using them essentially as the set is intended. I did warm it up a bit by adding that orangey shade. The two colours are Flesh First Base and Flesh Second Base, the orange one being the second base. At this stage I'm just blocking out the face, not using a wet palette, just taking the paint straight from the pot and the mixing palette there. Bear in mind if you're doing this in warmer temperatures, then the paint's probably going to dry way too quickly for you. But here it was going on well, and I just scratch it in, making sure not to paint over all the delicate work done with the eyes, of course. Here's our Lewis gunner after the base flesh tones have been applied. As you can see, they're not thick, they're still allowing some of what's underlying to shine through. By just blocking out this base, you're going to have your starting point for all the skin tones. Using a bit more of the second base, which will become the shadows, and because it's slightly darker, I'm picking out the area above the eye, just underneath it where the eye bags will be, and also any other shadow areas. This is particularly useful, of course, to frame the eyes that I painted previously. What I do make sure to do with a small flat brush is just to blend the edges or feather the edges of these shadow areas. Because I had a fair bit of overspill or a lack of neatness, let's say, in the top area, just under the eyebrows and above the eye, I made sure to put in plenty of the darker mix there. It's also a good chance to pick out things like furrows, and there again just paint those in the darker second base and blend them with a flat brush. It's important not to forget things like shadows around straps, so the same mix is used to pick out straps, and you'll see me using it around the face for any area that needs either shadow or definition. Here you can easily see how the eyes have been framed with that darker flesh colour. With that done, I integrate a little bit more of the Flesh First Base into the mix and just make sure that there's a seamless join between the darker colour and the Flesh First Base. That just smooths everything out. And also it covers up the face a little bit more in those areas where perhaps some of the underlying primer was still showing through. The hands also will need painting, of course, and so I use some of the same references in the set just to pick out the fingers. With that done, I put the face to one side and progress with other areas of the model, namely the uniform, but you'll see that in a separate video. Let's stick with the face and keep things organised. So I just picked out the roller neck or turtleneck sweater with a khaki colour at this stage. with the sweater painted, here's where we're at. As you can see, the eyes are still showing through nicely. We've got shadow areas in place, and off camera some of the uniform has been taking shape. Attention moved next to the leather strap for the helmet. As you can see, I used this rust dark shadow reference from Lifecolor and picked out, or rather blocked out, the whole of the strap. Moving back to the hands, it was time to add some shadow. I went back to the same mix I'd used on the face and applied shadow in all the crevices between the fingers and in any areas that would require darker shadow mixes. Moving back to the face then, it's time to start thinking about highlights and midtones. The first step was to go back to the Flesh First Base and infill and pick out any highlight item or area that would catch the light, in this case the ridge of the nose, the cheekbones, and just very gently, remember, using very thin coats. You can see on the mixing palette there, using these extremely thin coats. I'm just going to start targeting the areas that require highlighting. Also, the hair has been painted off camera. Again, do this with a very light touch. And of course, you can blend and feather as you go with a flat brush. Here you can see me working around the whole face then, picking out these areas that will become highlights. Paint reference at this stage is just still the Flesh First Base, which is the lighter of the two you can see on screen. This process continues over a long period, so picking out highlights and blending or feathering. This will go on until I feel that the most prominent areas are starting to jump out from the face and appear more three-dimensional. Here's how our subject looks after that initial range of highlights. I say highlights, but really in effect those Flesh First Base coats are a mid-tone in real terms, because we're going to get way more highlighted than that as we go along. I did a little bit of work on the sweater, just using darker colours of the khaki to pick out the weave of the sweater. Then I decided to move to shadows. Here you can see I'm using Flesh Second Shadow. For this I'm going to pick out with a lot more precision the eyes and frame them in a lot more detail. These, if you like, are the blood capillaries for the eyelids, but also they're the deepest shadow around the eyes. Go steady and go slow, but just try, a bit like with mascara for a lady, just try and frame the eye. What you're doing is underlining the bottom area of the eye. Build it up slowly. You don't have to do it all in one hit. You can build more intensity of colour with layers. And of course, if you do make a mistake, you can just take a moistened flat brush and clean everything up, or indeed blend it. There obviously needs to be a very deep area of shadow under the eyebrows. So the same dark shadow mix is applied very carefully there as well, to the top of the eye and in the area of the overhang of the brow. Again, you can remove anything with a flat brush, or here with a Q-tip or a cotton bud. For the most dark shadows, you can add a bit of brown to the mix as well, just to make sure you're getting the darkest possible shadows in those areas. The key here is to remove any white that shouldn't be there, so you get a natural looking framed eye with shadow at the top. Okay, in these close-ups you can see the overall effect. The shadow area around the eyes is quite pronounced. He's starting to look more weary and tired as well, because that's very much the look I'm going for in this figurine. It's World War I, so obviously the toll of trench warfare was immense on the soldiers. With the shadows done, it's time to go back to a highlight mix. And what I'm going to do with this is try and pick out lines in the eyelids, the lower eyelids. So I go back with the lighten mix and just touch up around where I've been painting and make sure there's a bit of a highlight on the lower eyelid, just where the light would catch it. So you may be wondering what brushes to use. I always use Hysterex Kolinsky Sable brushes. I've also got some Lifecolors and some Andrea and Vallejo brushes, but I tend to often go to the Kolinsky Sable brushes for detail painting. I've done a video on them and I'll put a link in the description below. There you can see the effect of building up those first initial highlights around the shadows that had been previously applied. Here's how that has come out, and you can see a little bit of highlighting has been added to the brow as well. But it's time now to move on to the lips, and again this is going to be using my dark shadow mix. That includes a lot of the dark leather brown shades and dark rust that I've used previously to make everything as shadowy as possible. Rather clumsily I just blend that in. I'm not overly worried about muck and dirt at this stage, there's so many more layers to come, but what you can do is clean it off if you do make a bit of a mess. That same super dark shadow mix is used in the nostrils as well. Again, that's going to be an area of maximum shadow. Likewise for the ears, they're going to need shadows. And also you'll see I'll apply it around different areas of the face, anywhere that needs the darkest shadows. With that done, my attention returns to the flesh part of the face, and particularly the mid-tone highlight areas. I just give a light coat of the Flesh First Base, particularly around areas where I've applied shadow, just to make sure that everything is working together and getting the effect I want. I'm returning to areas I've already painted in this same mix, but just building up the layers. That's the thing about acrylics. The effect isn't achieved immediately, it's a case of building up layer upon layer. And you'll see that throughout the development of this face. And here he is so far with some in-progress shots. As you can see, everything's a bit messy, but that's fine because as we go on, the different layers will neaten everything up and harmonise all the different colours in the face. Next up, I'm moving more towards the highlight part of the flesh painting set. You can see that this reference will be added to the mix. What I'm going to be doing then is moving on to much lighter versions of the flesh mix. That means it will be a combination of the highlight colour and the original Flesh First Base. With this lightened highlight then, the areas that would catch the most light are going to be picked out, starting off with the brow. I paint them in my light mix and then blend and feather with a flat brush. But you can see me picking out the details of the face in this highlight mix, in this case the furrow, but also the leading edge of the brow. I'll continue to do this around the entire face, starting off with highlight areas like the cheekbones, the ridge of the nose and so on. I'll layer the paint on and then blend it as I go. Sometimes I might scratch it or use lines which will add to the texture of the face, as we'll see. The nose obviously is going to be a prominent feature, so that will get plenty of light applications of the highlight colour. Now it can get a bit alarming at this stage as our figure turns into a very pale, sort of horror show like complexion, but not to worry, we're going to warm things up later. I mean, obviously I do want him to look quite pale, as that's part of the whole look of the figurine from the trenches, but you have to go unnaturally light or pale initially to then warm it up in the latter stages. All I'm worrying about then is just making sure that the highlights are very prominent. I have faith that I'll warm him up as I go along, and even if he looks a little bit like a zombie at this stage, hopefully he'll look a bit more human later on. So this will be a bit of a turning point as it does start to look a bit more realistic going forwards, particularly as the lightened highlights are built up on top of each other. You can start to see that having been at one stage slightly unrealistic, it's going to start to have the subtle radiance of skin. Let's just spool through and watch how this effect happens in real time. Although it's not perfect, you can start to see what's going on here with those highlights. And also you can see the scratchy lines that I applied in previous coats and the effect that that's having on the face as well, adding much needed skin texture and tone. If you want to make it more subtle, you can of course repeat with extra coats of your mid-tone or highlight mix and then smooth everything out. Don't forget areas like the earlobes and the neck will need the same highlights and the same effect that's been seen on the rest of the face. Here are some close-ups of the effects so far. Now time for the brightest highlight in the Lifecolor Flesh painting set, and that's the Flesh Second Light. This is almost an off-white, pinkish off-white, and that's going to be used, as you can imagine, for the most prominent highlights. I'll be reworking areas done previously with my previous highlight mix, but using this lightened version. These highlights are applied as much thinner, finer lines. I paint them on only in the most prominent areas, and I try and make it more obvious on one side of the face. The side that matches the highlight I put into the iris all those stages ago. Let's just speed through this section as I time-lapse and show the application of these very bright highlights over the whole face. The procedure is exactly the same. Apply, scratch it in as lines if you think it's necessary, and then blend. Well, he's looking paler than ever. It looks like he's seen a ghost, but we can work up from this, knowing that the highlights have been done. And now we move into a stage of trying to warm up the skin tones and make the complexion look a bit more realistic. As you can see just at the top of the screen there, I mix up my warmer shades, and these will be used very thin. If you haven't noticed already, it's not a case of doing base, then shadows, then highlights. I move in between all those stages, constantly building up layers. This warmer flesh colour then is, as you can see, very, very thin. It's almost a glaze or a very thin wash. That really is the secret to using these paints, and indeed other paints I've used like Vallejo's and Andrea colour. You really want to build up very, very thin layers, and you almost can't see the effect until it's started to dry slightly. But just paint it on and you'll see it will start to smooth everything out and impart a bit more of a natural complexion as opposed to being pale as a bedsheet. With a bit of blending with your flat brushes, you'll see it starts to look much more realistic. Then you can revert back to your original midtone or highlight mixes and just retouch any areas that need a bit more highlighting, but also blend everything more seamlessly. As you can see, a bit more colour has returned to the face, but those highlights painted previously are still showing through and can be built upon as necessary. Here then are some detail shots of progress, and you can see all those combined layers are starting to work quite well to get a realistic flesh tone. With that done, I turn my attention to the hands, which still need a bit of work, and they need to obviously match the face colour as well and the skin complexion, so I'll be working on those. Before returning to, yes, you've guessed it, back to the original flesh mixes, but this time much thinner coats. I work my way through my highlight, mid-tone, shadow mixes and apply these very thin coats over the face. How many of these repeat applications do you need? Well, it just depends on how the face is developing. But certainly this is a multi-stage approach. It's not something you do in one hit. You can see me pausing to look at the face, taking a step back, going back to my highlights, applying them as necessary, just constantly building up, time and again, new highlights. And there again, it's going to get more pale as you go on, but we know we can warm it up, just as we did in the previous section. And I'll keep going and working the face in the same way until I'm happy. With that done, it's time to start thinking about the environment our soldier is fighting in, and of course it's the trenches of World War I, so there's going to be a lot of muck, debris, it's going to be wet, it's going to be damp, so we want him to look dirty and muddy. In order to achieve this, I mix up very thin coats of a Lifecolor reference called Tyre Black, which comes from their black set. And I apply very thin washes of this colour. As you can see, it's a sort of almost an olive green black. And I'm going to apply very thin washes of this colour around the face and then blend it. This, if you like, is something between 5 o'clock shadow, and muck. And I'm going to be blending that each time I apply it. The effect of these light Tyre Black washes over the previously done highlights is really quite realistic and adds to the grime and muck that our soldier would have encountered. To add a bit of colour and redness to the complexion, I went for this reference, which actually comes from their guns set. So you can see it's a very deep crimsony colour, and that's going to allow me to add a bit of deeper blood and red colour, rosiness if you like, to the cheeks. In these detail shots you can see how the red has just warmed up the cheek area a little bit, and also added a bit of texture and tone to the skin again. So yes, he's pale from the fatigue of battle, but he's got a bit of colour in his cheeks and a bit of grime around his face as well. In the next episode I'll cover the painting of the helmet and the rest of the uniform and accessories. But that pretty much completes the face painting part of this build. I spray on some liquid pigments through an airbrush at low pressure, and that's going to be used to represent mud and dust and dirt, speckles of which can be sprayed or stippled over the face. And of course, if you don't get the effect you're looking for, the advantage with the liquid pigments is you can just remove it with their remover product. Lifecolor makes a leather painting set, and that was used to finish off the strap detail of the helmet, adding weathering, scratches and the sort of damage you expect on a realistic leather finish. I worked my way through the references in the set and used the different highlights to apply scratches, and of course I could blend everything as well. Just to give you an idea of how long it's taken to get to this point. I obviously keep a record as I'm editing, and though I speed through things, I have a sense of the time, and it's roughly 3 hours work on the face to get to this point. The locks of hair of course need their highlights, which I apply using this reference here, a lightened version of the brown that I used originally. But this means our subject is pretty much ready for the next stage. The last thing to do is to attach the helmet, which has been painted alongside the face, and you'll see me cover that in a lot more detail in the future video. But for now, we're done with the head. I glue the helmet onto the top of the head using some superglue from Deluxe Materials, and this is the end result. Let me know what you think in the comments. I reiterate, I'm not an expert figure painter, I'm simply trying to improve and learn, and I love sharing my experiences on the YouTube channel. I'll be releasing more reviews soon, and also more historical videos as well, plus more armour and AFV modelling. So stay tuned, and why not subscribe so you'll be notified whenever I release a video. Thanks for watching, and bye.
Subscribe for our latest videos.